What's a story that you've heard that still gives you chills to this day? My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mum worked and came home later on weekdays. As she reached up to put her key in the door, her mum opened it, in dressing gown, having left home sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around and a man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. Being ill that day had potentially saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. Crap, this one got me. Very short one. Was talking to someone who was first on scene to the Virginia Tech massacre. He told me that although the sight of dead bodies was disturbing, what really stays with him was the sound of all the cell phones ringing from people trying to contact them. That's incredibly sad to imagine. My uncle is a firefighter. He always has horrific tales to tell. One still sticks with me. He was first on the scene of a car accident. A log fell off a big transport truck and hit the car following it. The log sheared off the top of the car. Inside was a mom, dad, and child in the back seat. The child was lying down and sleeping when the accident happened. He awoke to the crashing of the car, only to see his parents' lifeless bodies still in their seats with no heads. That child will never be the same. Edit. I was told this as though it was true, but for all I know it could be a tale passed around firefighters. As some people pointed out, situations very similar to this one have occurred. He has told me other messed up things though, such as the misconception that bodies splatter when they leap from the window of a building. They actually bounce a little bit. Cannot unsee in my mind. I worked as a vet tech a couple of years ago, and this man came in to put down his old dog. Standard euthanasia protocol was used, get a basic history, ask if they want to be present, etc. As a co-worker of mine asked the "do you want to be present" part, he responded with yes, because I lost both of my boys last week and I wasn't there for them, and I'll be damned if I'm not there to send off my last living family member. Both of his boys we later found out died overseas. After hearing this, our whole staff went into our euthanasia room and just hugged this man and his dog several minutes past his dog moving on. Out of my years in the field, I've never heard such a heartbroken man to lose his animal. When I was 13, my dad was taken to hospital and my mother joined him, leaving me in the house alone sleeping. When they came back they noticed handprint on all the downstairs windows of the house and snow trodden in the porch. They searched the house and nobody was there. The next day we find out our next door neighbor was murdered. I know it's not that scary, but when I think how close I came to possibly being murdered or worse, it sends chills down my spine. That's pretty freaking scary. My grandfather's second wife was a sleepwalker, the kind that would get out of bed and do things like make a sandwich in the kitchen. My grandfather became used to it, and whenever he woke up in the middle of the night and she wasn't in bed beside him, he would find her and gently led her back to bed without waking her up, just as he had been advised. But one night he wakes up and she isn't lying in bed, but instead sitting on the edge of the bed, her back turned to him. He calls her name to ask what's wrong, but she doesn't answer, and he realizes she must be asleep. He can tell that she's doing something, holding something in her lap, but he can't see what it is. He sits up, looks over her shoulder, and sees what she's doing, still in her sleep, loading his revolver. When I was maybe 4 and my sister was almost 1, my parents had been divorced a few months, and my mother was driving us from Las Vegas to Wichita to see our grandparents. At one gas station on the way, this man came up to the car and told my mother, "I hate to see a single mother traveling alone, and I noticed we are headed in the same direction. Do you want me to follow you for a while to make sure you are safe?" She politely said, "No thanks," and drove off. At our next stop for gas, he again came up under the guise of checking on us. He had been following us since the last stop. While he was talking to my mother, his sport coat blew open and I saw a gun tucked in his pants. After she again told the man we were fine, she left and I told her what I saw. While she was driving, she wrote a note to give to the next gas station attendant saying who we were, where we were planning on spending the night, and that this creepy dude was following us and what he looked like. Could you please call the law in, I don't remember what town it was, and have them waiting at the hotel? When we got to the next stop, Mom raced in and handed the clerk the note and sped off with us. We got to the hotel and the manager had a cops waiting in one room and gave us another room with a pizza and pop. The man showed up and asked if his wife and kids had checked in yet and what room were they in. The manager gave him the key to the one with the police in it. They questioned him and found out he was a convicted rapist and also had a warrant out, so he was arrested. Smart mom. 1 rapist. 0. When Chinese flag bearer and basketball phenom Yao Ming walked through the national stadium during the opening ceremony of the Olympics, there was so much commotion where I was that I neglected to find out more about the little boy he was walking with. It was Lin Hao, a 9-year-old who survived the deadly earthquake in Sichuan in May. It's interesting how this tribute to the earthquake by opening ceremony director Zhang Yimou has been covered by the international press. Many Western news outlets reported that Lin was an earthquake survivor, but they failed to mention that the little boy, who was attending the Uzixi primary school in quake epicenter Wenchun County, not only survived, but after getting out of his classroom, went back into the rubble to pull 2 classmates out to safety. During his rescue, he was hit by falling rubble and suffered injuries on his head and arms. It's also been reported that while his classmates, 10 survivors out of 32 students, were waiting for help, he encouraged them to sing songs to keep their spirits up. When he was asked why he risked his life, he said, "I was the hall monitor. It was my job to look after my classmates." Somehow, this is the story that gave me the chills. Good chills, but real chills. A friend of mine was a bike messenger in Chicago. He was rowdy even for that line of work, known to kick cars that cut him off and the like. He apparently got into a confrontation with someone in an SUV about 10 years ago. The driver literally runs him down and plows right over him. The guy drove off and nobody managed to get the license plate number or a good description of the vehicle or the driver. The EMTs roll my dead friend over and he's cradling the guy's front plate in both arms like a football. I got chills even writing it. Dang dude, even when he was dying he wanted to make sure that butthole got caught. When I was in elementary school, a student at my school was involved in a triple homicide-suicide. His father murdered his mother, his brother, then him, then finally himself. For a while after that I imagined being in that house during that event. It happened in the middle of the night while they were sleeping, according to the news story, but I know that after the first murder everyone in that house was awake. Everyone you knew and spent your entire life with is being killed all around you by someone you looked up to, and you have nowhere to go. It's extremely terrifying to me. The child was like 10 or 11. Very sad. What makes it worse is that in high school, the exact same scenario happened again in my city. I don't think the child was at my school, but the house it happened in was within a mile from my house. Pretty crazy stuff. Went to high school with a kid who was present when his father shot his mother and then shot himself. He didn't come back to school again. My grandma during World War II used to steal potatoes and coal from Nazis for her family. She was young, between 12 and 16, I'm not sure. One day she noticed a few men standing near a fence but paid them no mind since she had just stolen coal and potatoes. This happened for a few weeks, her taking the same route, and she noticed the men getting frail and weak, so she snuck back later that evening and gave them some food. And continued to for a while, ended up saving their lives, and that is how my grandmother met my grandfather, who was a Russian soldier being held prisoner. Camp was possibly Brindonk, but I'm not sure. She passed a few years ago so I can't ask. On a side note, on her deathbed the priest asked my grandmom what she wanted to be known as, and she said a thief because of this story. The part about your grandmom saying she wanted to be known as a thief is the best. Amazing. My mom was a city housing manager. I remember her telling me about a little boy who had peed his pants at Chuck E. Cheese. His parents had taken him home, gave him a bath, and while his mother scrubbed him raw, his father kept turning the water hotter and hotter. The poor boy was burned and scared all over his body. I believe he was 4 at the time. I have heard many horrible stories in my lifetime, but this one still makes me shudder. 2 years ago in 6 days I was in a car wreck and almost died. I was driving home late at night, fell asleep at the wheel and slammed into a tree on my driver's side front door. I have no memory of what happened for the next couple of days, but I woke up in the ICU strapped to a bed with a respirator and feeding tube in me. I had broken bones in my skull, my collarbone, collapsed both lungs and ruptured my diaphragm. Every doctor I have seen since then looks at me in shock and tells me I shouldn't be here. The chilling part of the story is how I was found. Some neighbors of mine were driving home late from dropping their daughter off at a bus that she was taking to camp where she was a counselor. The bus left late. It was delayed because another couple counselors were an hour and a half late. One of them was my best friend from elementary school. After they finally dropped their daughter off, they headed home and were driving down a secluded road near our neighborhood. The wife saw a car parked on the wrong side of the road, but couldn't that there was any damage, because it was dark and on the opposite side of the car. They kept driving until she thought she heard honking and convinced her husband to turn around. I was unconscious. The car was dead and the horn was found to not be working later. They didn't know it was me until 2 days later. They saved my life. Pretty sure that in 6 days you need to throw them all a party. I was 16/17, and it was very common for my friends and I to go camping in the mountains. Bring weed, beer, acid, whatever. I was always a big fraidy cat when it came to getting fricked up, so I usually abstained. Parents' warnings took to heart, I guess. This particular night most of my friends were tripping acid, while I was sipping a beer, enjoying the fire and whatnot, and a bunch of us girls decided to go off somewhere to pee. We were still pretty young and quite squeamish about the boys seeing us squat. Heck, I still am. We stumble off into the woods and end up walking for quite some time. One girl was searching for the perfect spot, and she was super high, but we all just went along. We finally come to a small clearing and decide to pee there. Everyone pees and we set off back to camp. One of my friends hears a low moan coming from the other side of the clearing. Tells us to SHHH, but we don't hear it, so we urge her to come on. She is intent on investigating, so I decide to go with her. It was really dark out. You could only see as far as the lantern's light hit, so we were off into the unknown. Our light finally revealed a car, a brand new looking Subaru. It was really sudden like, and kinda freaked us out, so we scamper back to our friends screeching like lil 16/17 yo girls and set off back to our camp all freaked out. We tell the boys about it when we get there and they convince us we had happened upon another campsite and make fun of us for freaking out. 5 years later, I am in nursing school and working as an admin in a labor and delivery hospital. I have made a really good friend at work and she and I hang out all the time. One night she comes over and we are drinking and she tells me her dad has been missing since I was in high school. She says he had tried to commit suicide a few times and her family figured that he succeeded, but no one ever found him. She secretly was hoping he just ran off to start a new life and maybe she would see him again someday. Not very long after that, a man was found in a stolen Subaru up on the MT where we used to camp. He had been there for years, through every season, freezing to hot. There was a hose from the tailpipe to the window. The man had committed suicide. It made the news, and one of the guys from high school called and reminded me of that night in the woods. The car was found not far from our usual spot. Wasn't that nuts? That was what we saw. At work, my friend got a call from her mother. The guy in the car was her dad. We heard him moaning. We saw the car. If we weren't such dumb crap little kids, we could have done something. I watched my friend fall apart over it, but didn't tell her about my experience in the woods. I have always felt so bad. Nothing you should have done. Don't approach strangers in the dark at night. Probably the story about the girl that got lost in the Odessa catacombs back in 2005. I can only imagine that grim realization that you are lost and alone in a giant series of tunnels. Eventually the battery on your phone gives out and you're in complete darkness, feeling along the cold damp walls. An eerie silence surrounds you, broken only by your footfalls and sobs. You have no company but your fears, regrets, and the question of how you came to this when only a few hours prior you were drunkenly partying with friends. One day bleeds into the next and your calls into the darkness go unanswered. Your hope of rescue begins to wane. No one is listening to your prayers. You're parched, scared, hungry, tired, and you slowly realize that this is where you're going to die. You choke on every bit of your existence. You've gone through the anger, the denial, the bargaining, but now you're too tired, too dizzy, and your head won't stop throbbing. Eventually you collapse from dehydration and your body isn't found for another 2 years. Oh gosh, so many. My Oma, grandmother in German, grew up in a small town called Wiesloch. Germany during the Holocaust and World War II. She rarely talks about that period of her life, but when we ask she would say things like, yeah, I had friends who just disappeared, but we were raised not to ask questions. However, the most horrific story I heard was when she told me she was playing by a railroad track near her home with some friends. At one point, a large freight train came by. She heard what she thought to be scratching and screaming, but not those of an animal because she had heard that many times before when the train had passed. This time it was different. So she ran home and asked her mom what that could have been or meant. She said that her mom just yelled at her to never ask questions like that again and to stay away from the tracks and talk to no one. A woman I dated who went to school in Missouri had some friends who went cave diving a lot. While diving one day, their line fell from the ceiling, as she put it, and they were lost. She said when their bodies were recovered, it was apparent they'd fought over the last of the air in their tanks. That is the stuff of nightmares. My grandfather was in the Vietnam War. I remember he told me his unit was walking through a dense forest, and he dropped his map, bent over to pick it up, and the soldier walking behind him took a bullet to the face. If he hadn't dropped his map, that would be him, and I wouldn't be here. This is probably going to get buried, but another user mentioned Carla Homolka, and I remembered a story about my mom. In her early 20s, my mom managed a photography studio in a mall in Scarborough, Ontario. One day my mom is working alone and this guy comes in asking for a photo, but he's being a little weird about it, saying he needs a picture taken of his hip. They did a lot of injury photos for court cases, so my mom assumes this is what he needs and starts loading up the camera. When she looks up, he's got his pants totally off and he's exposing himself. My mom starts laughing hysterically and tells him to get out. She doesn't have time for this nonsense. About an hour later, a girl that was working at the denim store down the hall comes down to tell her about this pervert that took off his pants in the middle of the store, trying to expose himself to the female customers. They both have a laugh. He didn't seem all that menacing. Just, obviously, not all there. 2 days later the girl comes running into my mom's studio, pale as a ghost. On the front page of the paper is a sketch of the guy, with the title Scarborough Rapist. It's pretty crazy to think that she was that close to getting attacked by Paul Bernardo in the peak of his rapist crime spree. TLDR. My mom laughed at Paul Bernardo's dong. Didn't get murdered. My mom knew Paul Bernardo too. They went to school together and he'd often drive her home. And this was at the time when he was doing all of the killing and stuff. Scary crap. When I was in my early teens, my parents used to go out dancing and left me alone on Friday nights. We lived in a rustic, soporific house, surrounded only by a desolate sawmill and a defunct car garage. The closest neighbor was about a mile away. I used this opportunity to throw heavy metal albums in their fantastic stereo and play them at an enormous volume. One evening, I put in Metallica's And Justice for All and went to the restroom in a small corner in the house. Blackened was blaring in the distance and it seemed as if the floor was shaking. I walked back into the living room and looked at the front door and I could see the chain on the door pulsating in rapid rhythms. I remember thinking the bass on this system is incredible. Then, during the middle of the song, the chain stopped moving. Less terrifying explanation. The bass hit a resonant frequency that caused the door to vibrate, and then when the pitch changed it stopped. When my uncle was 4, he visited his aunt's home for the summer. There were really no kids around that were his age, so he mainly just rode his bike around the neighborhood to amuse himself. One day he rode a little too far and got lost, but luckily a car pulled over and told him that it was okay. He would take him back to his aunt's house. So my uncle loaded his bike in the car and got in. The man started to drive, and my uncle, thinking it was one of his aunt's friends, asked no questions. It wasn't until they turned onto the highway that my uncle started to ask the man where they were going, that his aunt's house wasn't near the highway. The man didn't say anything to him and kept driving until suddenly he pulled over to the side of the road and seemed to think really hard on something. He then turned the car around and dropped my uncle off at the entrance to the neighborhood. My uncle realized years later that this man had attempted to kidnap him and at the last minute changed his mind. Pretty freaking chilling. I wonder what was going through that man's head. The story takes place one July morning in 1982. I was late for my job as a fry cook at a country club on Cape Cod. As I raced my Jeep over back roads in a rural part of town, I came around a tight bend in heavy morning fog, and there, standing in the middle of the road, was a man, pale and sweaty. He was wearing only a pair of shorts and a backpack. I saw him only for a split second, before I swerved and went off the road, but I'll never forget the face. He stared straight ahead, looking me right in the eyes with a wide-eyed, maniacal look on his face. His mouth was open as if he was screaming, but there was no sound. I got out of the Jeep and ran back looking to take a swing at the guy, but he was gone. It wasn't until 10 years later that I saw him again, on TV. His name is Haddon Clark and he's a serial killer. He's the man I saw that morning in Woods Hole. I have zero doubt about it. You don't forget a face like that. This is a story that happened to my dad several years ago. My family runs and lives on a large farm, and around summer each year we are often forced to work longer hours than normal in order to harvest hay for the livestock in addition to the other routine duties. Well, my dad was finishing up one of our neighboring fields and had just a few more bales of hay to go, so he decided to work through the night and be done with it. Around 2 AM he finished the last hay bale but noticed that it didn't come out properly from the baler. He raises the arm of the tractor up as high as it would go, hitting about 10 feet, to cast light on the bale. He exits the tractor and begins to approach the bale about 7 feet from the tractor's headlights. As he is removing excess twine from the bale he suddenly can't see. Then the realization of what was happening started to creep into his mind. Something was standing between him and the headlights of the tractor, waiting. He came home several hours later, early in the morning, clearly disheveled. He told me the story, concluding that eventually it decided to leave. My dad said he stood in the newly restored light with his back against the hay bale for the rest of the night, unsure what to do. When the sun began to come up he circled the tractor and made his way home. He followed that by saying, "I knew almost immediately something wasn't right. My mind wanted me to believe that a deer or one of our cows wandered in front of the tractor, but the lights were 12 feet high. Man, why doesn't this kind of cool stuff happen in Farming Simulator?" I know I'm late to the party, but here goes. I took genocide as a class in my senior year of high school. We were lucky enough at the end to have a bunch of Holocaust survivors come and speak to us. One story stood out in particular. A man told us of how his life was saved by another prisoner. He was ruffling through some garbage to try and find something edible when a guard caught him. The guard forced him to kneel and he remembers the cold feeling of the guard's pistol poking the back of his neck. All of a sudden, a thick fog rolls in out of nowhere. The guard is distracted for a moment and then the man heard a loud clang and rapid footsteps. The fog cleared as quickly as it came and the man saw a bloody shovel on the ground while another prisoner was running away at full speed. He then told us how he is broken and will never be whole until he sees the man again and thanks him. Fast forward 3 stories. A man comes in and tells of all about a night where he went to go rummage through some garbage to find something edible. He sees another man doing the same in the distance and then sees him being found out by a guard and almost executed. He was afraid, but when a thick fog rolled in he saw a shovel near him and knew it was his only chance. He hit the guard on the head and ran back to his bunk without any spoils to hide. He then laments how he never saw the man again. Needless to say, we all freaked out and started screaming that the man he saved spoke only 30 minutes ago. The 2 men were brought together after nearly 70 years and break down crying while sharing a long embrace. Turns out they've been living only 4 miles from each other for the past 40 years. I love a happy ending. I'm a funeral director, and one day we had a man come in who lost his teenage daughter. She was a daddy's girl through and through, so he was pretty torn up about her passing. He bought her the beat that money could buy: nice casket, a good vault, etc. But after she was interred he kept having these nightmares that his daughter was drowning, in a bathtub, in the ocean, when a car she was in careened off of a bridge. They were a bit different every time, but the message was always the same. In every dream he could hear her screaming, "Daddy, help me, I'm drowning." Now keep in mind, drowning had nothing to do with her cause of death. At first he thought he was just grieving, but the nightmares wouldn't let up. He came back to us and after explaining the situation, we got a permit to disinter her and move her to another cemetery. When the diggers removed the lid off of her vault, which, by the way, is supposed to keep water out, it was filled to the brim with water. After she was moved he stopped having nightmares. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.